When Queen Victoria ascended the throne of the United Kingdom in June 1837, she was just 18 years old. Small in stature and raised under a suffocating set of rules known as the Kensington system, she had spent much of her early life isolated from the world. Her childhood was dominated by her mother, the Duchess of Kent, and the controlling Sir John Conroy, who dictated nearly every aspect of her existence, from her daily schedule to the people she could speak to. Becoming queen wasn't just a political milestone. It was a personal revolution. Suddenly, she had freedom. She could choose her words, her advisors, even her husband. And from the moment she laid eyes on her cousin Albert of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, she knew who that husband would be. Their marriage, formalized in February 1840, wasn't arranged in the traditional royal fashion. It was a rare royal love story. Victoria proposed to him, a reversal of tradition that shocked many at court. But her affection was genuine. Her diary entries were filled with giddy adoration. She described his beauty, his tenderness, his moral integrity. She called him "my angel" and confessed she could scarcely breathe when he wasn't near. Albert, intelligent and disciplined, took his new role seriously. Though a foreign prince with no official authority, he quickly immersed himself in British affairs. He advised ministers, championed industrial and scientific advancement, and helped bring structure to Victoria's emotional nature. Together, they had 9 children, and despite the pressures of monarchy, their household was unusually close-knit by royal standards. Albert was more than a consort. He was her partner in governance, parenting, and purpose. He became her compass in a world of power and ceremony. But beneath the grandeur of their public life, Albert was often unwell. He carried an air of melancholy, fatigued by the endless obligations of state and the pressures of maintaining a constitutional monarchy. Though he remained dutiful, there were signs that something deeper troubled him, physically or emotionally, perhaps both. In late 1861, those concerns became reality. After months of declining health, Albert succumbed to what was officially diagnosed as typhoid fever. He died on December 14th at Windsor Castle, only 42 years old. The impact on Queen Victoria was immediate and absolute. The woman who had ruled an empire now fell into the deepest grief imaginable. Albert had not only been her husband, he had been her protector, advisor, and emotional anchor. Without him, she was lost. In the days following his death, she refused to leave her bed. Her sobs echoed through the halls of Windsor. She described feeling as though a light had gone out of her life. And in many ways, it had. Victoria withdrew from public life almost entirely. She wore black, not for a year, not for a decade, but for the remainder of her life. Her face was veiled. Her laughter vanished. She refused to open Parliament in person, and her absence from major public ceremonies caused concern in government circles. Ministers pleaded with her to return, but she remained in seclusion, retreating to Balmoral Castle or Osborne House, where she could grieve in silence. Yet her grief wasn't passive, it was active, obsessive, ritualized. She ordered that Albert's rooms be preserved exactly as they had been the day he died. His nightclothes were laid out each evening. His shaving water was brought in each morning. His shoes were polished. His inkwell was refilled. Servants were instructed to behave as if he might return at any moment. She kept his watch beside her bed and his photograph on her pillow. And most haunting of all, Queen Victoria slept with his clothes. She would lie down each night wrapped in garments that once held his scent and warmth. She clung to his dressing gown, his nightshirt, even pieces of his underclothes, not as relics, but as living extensions of his presence. Inhaling their fabric became her only connection to the man who had once shared her bed. She surrounded herself with his belongings, transformed her bedrooms into shrines, and clutched physical objects like lifelines to a ghost. Modern observers might see this as a case of unresolved trauma or prolonged grief disorder. But in Victorian England, the Queen's mourning became the national blueprint. Her behavior, extreme though it was, inspired a widespread cultural movement. Mourning turned into fashion, into etiquette, into economy. Jet black jewelry became the standard. Mourning gowns were produced in enormous quantities. Etiquette guides instructed women on how to mourn properly, detailing when to wear full black, when half mourning was allowed, and when color could cautiously return. Entire industries emerged to serve the bereaved. There were mourning photographers who specialized in portraits of widows and post-mortem images of the dead. Mourning stationery with black borders became standard. Hair from deceased loved ones was woven into rings, brooches, and lockets. Victoria didn't just change how the nation viewed death, she turned grief into ceremony. But while the public adopted mourning as a temporary phase, Victoria never moved on. She turned her grief into a way of life. Her children, particularly her eldest daughter Vicky, often voiced frustration at their mother's emotional unavailability. Prime ministers like Disraeli and Gladstone struggled to conduct state affairs with a queen who had effectively removed herself from the throne. The press eventually turned on her. Newspapers began referring to her as the Widow of Windsor. Republicans seized on her withdrawal as evidence that the monarchy had become obsolete. Even her popularity among commoners began to wane. And yet none of it moved her. Her loyalty to Albert, in life and in death, superseded duty, decorum, and even governance. In the mid-1860s, the Queen found solace in a burly Scottish servant named John Brown, who had been part of Albert's staff at Balmoral. Brown was rough, direct, and fiercely devoted. He spoke to the Queen with an honesty few dared. He accompanied her on walks, stood outside her room at night, and addressed her not as Your Majesty, but simply as woman. Victoria adored him. She commissioned portraits of him, gave him gifts, and allowed him an unprecedented level of access. Some suspected he had become her lover. Others whispered they had secretly married. No one could prove it, and Victoria never acknowledged more than friendship. But Brown's presence softened her isolation. He became a buffer between her and the outside world. And yet, even with Brown in her daily life, Albert remained untouchable. The rituals never changed. His clothes were still laid out. His slippers remained by the fire. His bed untouched. His photographs still the last thing she saw before sleep. When Brown died in 1883, she plunged once more into mourning. But by then, her sorrow had calcified into routine. She was not simply a woman grieving her husband, she had become the living embodiment of grief itself. Public appearances resumed slowly. She celebrated jubilees and state ceremonies, but always in black, always with the veil. Her image, once fresh and youthful, now symbolized permanence, sacrifice, and emotional endurance. And that was no accident. Victoria had weaponized her grief. By turning mourning into monarchy, she had redefined royal identity. To honor the dead was to honor the crown. Albert's memory became national memory. Statues of him were erected across the empire. His name adorned schools, hospitals, and institutions. His legacy was immortalized, not by his actions alone, but by her refusal to let him fade. Even in death, she would not let him go. When Queen Victoria died in January 1901, at the age of 81, she left behind detailed instructions for her burial. She was to be dressed in a white gown, a subtle echo of her wedding day, and laid to rest with Albert's dressing gown, a plaster cast of his hand, a lock of his hair, and one of his letters pressed against her. She would go into the grave not as a monarch alone, but as a wife eternally bound to the man she had lost 4 decades earlier. Her death marked the end of the Victorian era, both in name and in spirit. The world would move on, into modernity, into industry, into war. But the rituals she shaped endured. Royal funerals today still echo her legacy. Public displays of grief are still scrutinized. Black veils, floral tributes, and silent processions still follow the path she laid. Mourning is no longer just private. It is a performance, a message, a mirror of power. And it all began with one woman, lying alone in bed, wrapped in the scent and memory of a man long gone. The empire was vast. The palaces were grand. But Victoria's truest realm was built not from stone or law. It was stitched from nightshirts, soaked in tears, and folded beside her pillow. If this story gave you a glimpse into the hidden heart of a queen, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. There's more strange and powerful history waiting to be uncovered.